From the river we followed Zeke back across the flat and made camp against a large sandstone cliff, which offered some protection from the elements and put us away from the stinking river. The cliff faced southeast, with a gentle sand swell sweeping away toward the flat from its base. Zeke climbed to the top of the swell, searched briefly in the sand, and picked up an agate chip and a broken piece of ancient pottery. My people slept here in times past. We camp here, he said. Yeah, but, said one of the students in a tired voice, it looks much better down there on the flat where the grass is. Zeke hung his gear in a juniper and squatted in a teaching position on the top of the swell. This place rises above the river bottom. In the night, cold air will sink below us onto the flat, and it will be warmer here. The cliff will greet the morning sun first and reflect warmth to us early. The cliff behind breaks the night breezes from the west. But the wind is out of the east today, said Tim. It will blow right on us all night. Zeke winked but ignored the statement. He continued. If rain falls, we can find shelter under the overhanging cliff. There's juniper wood here and much tall grass nearby. Looking beyond the students, he pointed to the grassy flat and said, most campers choose a green spot on the riverbank for their camps. They rig up modern miracle models of civilization to scare off the dampness of the grass, the cold air from the river, and the mosquitoes. They sleep in, waiting for the sun, which shines there last and leaves there first. Several nodded in innocent appreciation, showing some excitement at the thought of sleeping in such a wonderful place as the sand swell by the cliff so far from the river. The east wind will bring us a storm in a few days, but at night it dies, and the breezes follow down the canyons until the sun brings back the east wind. Here the night breeze will come from the west. With that, we turned our attention toward the approaching night. Zeke, in his usual jovial mood, jostled the less eager members of our group who were standing around with their hands in their pockets. He herded them toward a gravel outcropping. Soon everyone began straggling back into camp, toting bundles of firewood and cobble-sized stones from the gravel hill. We selected a broad, sandy area where nothing was growing and scraped out a pit approximately 6 feet wide and long enough so that all the group could lie down side by side. Zeke's boys, later known as the Blister Patrol, helped their leader line the pit with the cobblestones, or rather, they watched him do it. Zeke placed each stone carefully. When this was finished, he instructed a group to pile sticks and brush over the stones in the pit. Then, with a hot coal from the fire, he lit the pile of brush. In a few moments, the whole sky was lit up. It took nearly an hour for the fire to burn down to a hot bed of coals. Upon this, we tossed smaller sticks and strips of bark to keep the fire going for another hour. Meanwhile, some of the apprentice fire starters, who had returned from the sagebrush patch with enough potential to burn up the countryside, began sweating, grunting, and groaning as they tried to master the technique of keeping a spinning drill in a socket that wouldn't hold still under an unsteady foot. As it grew darker, these enthusiasts moved closer and closer to the hot coal bed, where they strained in the firelight to see and master the machines they had created. I remembered the first time I had tried to start a fire with a bow drill. I had frittered away the daylight hours, perfecting my shelter for that first night. When the darkness was upon me, I had tried to control the rickety bow drill in the darkness and failed. So, shivering, I had tromped down a short track in the brush and spent the night running back and forth to keep from freezing to death. I've never made that mistake again, always starting my fire well before dark. Now I thought how fortunate these people who were, in the presence of warming flame, light, and helpful teachers, were learning a softened version of my hard lesson. Zeke finally pronounced the coal bed hot enough, and with long sticks, everyone began scraping out the larger burning coals and embers, leaving a thin layer of ashes over the very hot stones. Then he instructed everyone to scoop up handfuls of dry sand from the surface of the ground, warning them not to scoop too deep into the moist sand below. They threw the dry sand over the ashes until they had built up a layer approximately 10 inches deep over the stones. By this time it was quite late, and the rigors of the first day were beginning to show on everyone. I was conscious that no one had even mentioned eating. Zeke went behind a bush and returned with a neat bundle of dried bunch grass and cliff rose bark. He had gathered it earlier without anyone noticing. He silently and deliberately stepped onto the coal bed, opened his bundle, and spread out a soft straw cushion over the spot where he chose to lie for the night. There was a flurry of puzzled looks and confusion as everyone disappeared in the darkness to scratch up what they could for their night's bedding. Some returned with only a handful, others were more fortunate. Within the hour, they all had a spot on the hot coal bed. I waited until everyone was settled and then nestled on one end next to Big Taylor. About that time, Zeke rose from his warm bed and, grabbing his blanket, surrendered his spot to the person sleeping next to him, who gladly slid over onto his matting. This left a gap that was soon filled as each person shoved to the center in an effort to snuggle. The evening was becoming quite cool. Zeke ambled over to the campfire and plopped down. Good move, I thought. I should join him. But the cold bed was getting warm and I was comfortable. Though I sensed it would not last long, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep anyway. It's a wonderful sight, not to mention sound, to see a sleeping person suddenly rise, straight up perpendicular, seemingly propelled by a force that leaves a trail of smoke and sparks, awake in orbit, ripping and tearing the air to shreds, to at last plop to earth with a bewildered, helpless air of embarrassment. I suppose my slumber had been interrupted in this fashion on at least 100 previous occasions. Each time the cause has been identified without question: squirming. No other sleeping action could so interrupt a tranquil condition under a hot, cold bed. I can testify that only squirming produces such spectacular results. Now Zeke had taken great pains to ensure the proper depth of insulating dirt between the hot rocks and the bedding material of dry grass. Furthermore, the group had received an elaborate Zeke-type sermon on the virtues of not squirming. He had warned, no hip holes on community hot cold beds. Moving around too much keeps the others awake. It also scrapes away the insulating dirt. Sardines never swim in the can. But sure enough, not an hour had passed before the center occupant levitated, releasing from under him that telltale smell of burning wool. He was lucky. The burnt hole was only as big as a pumpkin on his hip and was only first degree. Over by the fire, Zeke rose up in a cloud of dust and, pointing a fierce finger toward the sky, mockingly and humorously tongue-lashed the whole group, repeating his earlier admonitions and throwing in a comment to the effect that civilization and soft beds had surely ruined these gringos for the good life under the stars, that he was certain that unless they all practiced better PMA, positive mental attitude, and quit squirming, chances were they would all be roasted and ready to eat before morning. Then, with the air of a great chieftain, he pulled his blanket tightly around himself and dropped in the dust from whence he had arisen. He was right. At midnight, some guy near the middle yelled, "Fire!" Big Taylor beside me mumbled something about a steam bath, and the next thing I knew, there was a whooping all over the place, with sparks and smoke streaming in every direction. I noticed 3 or 4 red, glowing patches of light streaking toward the river. Without any compassion at all, I grabbed my blanket and stomped over to the campfire, curled up next to Zeke, and pleasantly cooled off for the rest of the night. Zeke never moved. I awoke once or twice to throw wood on the fire and noticed a lot of talking going on over at the coal bed.